Good evening and welcome. Tonight we will be going over the history and geography of Bay in Somalia. Now tonight is a tablet only video, no maps tonight, because there aren't a lot of pictures in this region, and we'll talk about why that is. But I thought that this map was a lot more interesting and complex than the one in my atlas, so we're just on the tablet tonight. So let's start by seeing exactly where we are in the world. We are in Africa, in a region of East Africa known as the Horn of Africa, which I've done many videos on Somalia. I'll link my playlist up in the corner there if you want to learn more about this area, because we are going to talk about some things that overlap with the Bakul region that I've already discussed on this channel. But like I always have to mention when we talk about East Africa, we are in an area known as the East African Rift, or sometimes the Great African Rift, where this whole piece of the continent is ripping apart off of the mainland, and in hundreds of millions of years will become its own big island, or maybe even a continent. I mean, people probably will not be around to see that happen, but we can see some of the effects of that happening now. You can literally see the line ripping here and creating what's known as the African Great Lakes region. Also creates a lot of volcanic activity near the DRC and up here in Ethiopia. But this cracking and tearing apart creates this really interesting barren landscape in East Africa, and it is very prevalent here in like southeastern Ethiopia and in this area of Somalia. And I think it's particularly beautiful here in the Bay region because we have an overlap of the lush green of the coast here and that arid, ripped apart landscape that I mentioned before. And it's like where the two completely intertwine, and it looks gorgeous from above when you zoom in. Gosh, it looks like you're looking at a zoom in of Jupiter. Isn't that something else? It is so stunning to me. Like every little corner of this area is just so interesting from above. The colors are just, doesn't this look like Venus right here? Like the clouds of Venus? It's amazing to me. All the little rivers and wadis going through there. It's awesome. And you don't get that in a regular atlas. You only get that on Google Earth. So that's really why I wanted to show you Google Earth more so than my atlas. Not because the pictures here are great, which there's very few, but this landscape, from ground level just kind of looks barren, semi-desert, slightly green down here in the south, but from above it's just so stunning, I think, in my opinion. The capital of this region is actually, let me clear this out so that it doesn't throw me off, because that's not where we're going at all. There it is. Baidoa. It's called Baidoa. I think we have a slideshow here. It's not great, but you can really see the hustle and bustle of this city here. Sweet donkey there. But yes, this area, isn't that gorgeous? This area is also part of a region of Somalia known as the Southwest State. Look at these zebus. Cute. I guess I'll talk about it now. So during the 1990s, Somalia went through a very brutal civil war. Nobody won out on either side. The country is still dealing with the repercussions of that. It's just now starting to bounce back, I'd say, in like the last 5 years or so. And because of all of the political instability, many regions of Somalia and what's now called Somaliland, broke apart and formed their own autonomous governments. So the one that's pretty much like here or so is the Southwest state. It was established in 2002, dissolved temporarily in 2005 while they reshuffled, and was reestablished in 2009. Baidoa was the capital until 2014, I believe, and I think now it's down here, I believe, if I remember correctly. So the Bay region is one of the breadbaskets of Somalia. This area here is one of the more fertile areas, mainly for growing sorghum and other kind of cereal grains, but it's also perfect for raising livestock, as you saw on that picture of the zebu cows. But we'll discuss that in a bit more detail at the end of the video of the history section. So why don't we get into it? Let me see. I'm trying to find it from above. I think it's over here. No, that's not it at all. I have it saved in my recent search right here. Ignore the other searches, it's a spoiler. So no pictures here, but this town right here, Bur, I believe means hill, from what I can tell by the names here. This huge rock here, do you see this? And the rocks around it, it's massive and green and beautiful. And here's why I was trying to find it from above, because it's just this big old green spot in this incredible alien looking landscape. It almost looks like Mars right here, doesn't it? That beautiful soil. Like, it's amazing. So in this town, in the 1980s, they found that in the caves in these big rocks was evidence of very early human settlement, mainly in the form of burials. And the bones were dated to around 30,000 years ago. But due to the Civil War, they have not been excavated since, so we don't know a lot about the early peoples that lived in this area. We do know that Baidoa was established, I'm trying to recenter myself, Baidoa was established by a people group known as the Madanle. I'm trying to read my notes in the dark. The Madanle. They were a culture that were best known for digging wells, for finding the water under the ground, the aquifers, and digging wells. And they have a legend that a bird actually flew and pecked the ground to tell them that this was the spot to build. And they established a trading center here. That was very prosperous because if you kind of look from above, we have the connection there to Mogadishu and kind of the more interior areas. Kind of right in the middle. Let me reorient myself again. Let's get rid of this. It's distracting. Baidoa. There we go. Baidoa. That time for the Madanle was not to last because the Ajuran Sultanate would come in probably around the 1500s or so, and they would exile the Madanle people. I wonder if they weren't Muslim, and that's why. Or maybe they were just bullies that wanted to take over this town. Either way, they were kicked out, and they were replaced by what is now the majority ethnic group, which is a branch of the, again, I'm reading my notes in the dark, making sure I pronounce this right, the Rahanwein people, known as the Marifle. Still the dominant ethnic group in this whole region today, to be honest. Like, the whole, area of Somalia here is mostly different cultures within the Rahanwein. Being replaced by the Ajuran was the Jaledi Sultanate, who would control, again, this area until 1911 was when the Sultanate collapsed. And by 1913, the Italians had moved in and occupied the region as part of their colony of Italian Somaliland, which was essentially this part here of Somalia. This part was owned by the British Somaliland. This was the Italian part. And of course, that would last through World War II. Now jumping ahead to the 1990s and the Civil War, the government had collapsed, splintered into many different factions that all fought each other and created chaos all throughout Somalia. I remember it as a child even. And it was kind of this area in particular that was very affected by famine because of the war. And actually, my fellow American viewers, we have a congresswoman named Ilhan Omar, and she's actually from Mogadishu, but she spent her childhood here in Baidoa, and this was where she fled to the United States during the Somali Civil War. Just a neat fact, I think. She is one of the first Muslim representatives in the United States, period. Rashida Tlaib being the other, they were both elected the same year, so you can't really say one was the first. She was one of the first. Anyway, the nickname of the town here was the City of Death. The famine was so destructive to the population here, not to mention, of course, the fighting, which would really pick up here in the 2000s. In 2006, the Battle of Baidoa was fought against two powers. One was Ethiopia. Ethiopia was, on one hand, well, their official region was they were very concerned about the violence heading north toward Ethiopia, and they wanted to squash it before it reached their border. The other is that Ethiopia, for quite a while, until very recent history, would very aggressively invade their neighbors, very famously. And if they saw any opportunity to head, particularly to Eritrea, but also Somalia, they would take it. So this was an opportunity. And they were fighting another faction of the government known as the Islamic Courts Union. This being a splinter group out of Mogadishu, out of the government that formed after the main fallout of the Civil War. That you can tell by the name, the Courts Union, they were very much into Sharia law and wanted to impose Sharia law on Somalia. So they were marching north. Ethiopia is marching this way. They met here and had a very large battle with the Ethiopians, actually won, and kind of gave themselves permission to continue invading parts of Somalia, perpetuating even more chaos in this area. But a splinter off of the Islamic Courts Union, which dissolved in 2009, was a very dangerous group. And I'm going to be careful saying their name because I don't know. Because there's certain words that if you say them too many times on YouTube, they'll demonetize your video. So I'm just going to say it once, okay? It's a group known as Al-Shabaab. And they are an even more militant Islamic group. Like you can imagine. Like in other parts of the world, extreme militaristic Islamic groups. They captured this area and Baidoa in 2007, 2006, 2007, 2008. Spread about. And the city was not liberated until 2012, which it's one of those groups that, outlaws things like music and dancing and rights for women, things like that. So it was a period of time where there was, no singing or dancing, anything like that. So reestablishing culture and letting that shock of that extreme regime wear off. We've seen in other parts of the world. This group is still around technically, and one of the reasons that there aren't a lot of pictures here is that they are hiding in parts of this region out in this beautiful landscape. So it's not the safest place. Like it's safer nowadays, but it's not the safest place to go, especially if you're Western. So that's why we're not really looking at any pictures here. Because there really aren't a lot. It's not a place for people to look around and take photos. Not to mention, there is still a lot of turmoil happening in this region. There was a very massive famine again in 2011. It picked up again in about 2021, due mainly to drought. The breadbasket was not very fruitful at all in these past couple of years, mainly due to soil erosion, the groups hiding out, if you know what I mean, leading to instability in the area, people having to flee their homes, things like that. Not to mention a population boom that occurred after the main events of the Civil War and occupation ended. It's expanding rapidly. More mouths to feed, right? So that is ongoing. I don't think today that I'm filming this in 2014, it's as bad as it was in like 2023. Did I say 2014? 2024. I hope I didn't say 2014. I probably did. But from what I can tell, it's improving. There's a lot of human rights and hunger groups here, charity groups, children's rights groups here, helping out the people who have lost homes or livelihoods or their families to these destructive events. So I think it's on the up and up, like most of Somalia is, but I didn't really see any evidence of that. I'm just assuming that because most of the articles I read about it were from a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that there's either no new updates or it's not a news story anymore and it's improving, which is always the best. I'm actually really glad I didn't see any articles from this year about this area, because that means that it's just par for the course, you know. It's not perfect by any means, but that's kind of Somalia's story since the 1990s, isn't it? Not perfect by any means, but every year improving. And then someday Somalia is going to be, I can imagine by like maybe 10 years from now, this country will be a beautiful hotspot for tourism, and maybe those archaeologists can come back and excavate and learn more about the cultures here, and just a general improvement of the country. We can only hope, because if anyone deserves it, it's Somalia. And that is the end of our video for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this style of content, please consider subscribing. Tomorrow's video, we will have a lot more Google Earth to look at, almost too much Google Earth to look at, and we'll be in the Atlas as well as we will be in one of the more beautiful touristy areas of Honduras. So be sure to subscribe so you won't miss out. If you learned something new in this video, give this video a thumbs up. Let me know what you learned down in the comments below. I hope that you found this video to be relaxing and educational. Let's pull the borders back up. And I hope that you have a good night. Good night. Good night. Good night.